Good morning, everybody. We'll call the meeting to order. It's the first Planning and Zoning Commission meeting of 2023. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Madam Clerk, we'll begin, as we always do, with the establishment of quorum, please.
Mr. Walters?
Here?
Ms. Kirkner?
Here.
Mr. Lester?
Here.
Mr. Hoff? Mr. Kane?
Here.
Mr. Smith?
Here.
Mr. Klosik?
Here.
Commissioner Gordon?
Here.
Secretary Eisenberg?
Here.
Mr. Chair, please let the record reflect that 7 members are present, and we do have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Would you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. We have been presented with an agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda?
No, the agenda stays as written.
All right. I'd be happy to entertain a motion for the approval of the agenda as presented.
I move we approve it.
A second.
And all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Sounds unanimous to me. We'll move on to item 5, review and approval of the minutes from December 13th. But I also have minutes here from December 7th.
Yes, they weren't printed out the last time, but they were approved at the last
Okay,
meeting.
okay, good. Okay, so we have before us the minutes from December 13th. Are there any suggested edits or corrections to those minutes? I'd be happy to entertain a motion for approval.
I move that we approve the minutes.
Second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous, very good. The December 13th minutes are approved. I will sign and hand them over to Madam Clerk in just a moment. Move on to item 6, excuse me, commission member reports. I don't normally say anything. I usually just say I have nothing to say. Today I actually want to say something. Linda was good enough to forward an email sometime during the holidays, and it really had to do, it was from Chris Swam, the digital media manager / webmaster. And he pointed out that our comments around saying nobody is watching, or we joke and sarcastically say we have millions of people watching and our ratings are great or they're not great or whatever. He said that can be offensive to the staff broadcasting these meetings, and it makes it seem like what they're doing is not important. And I think he's right, and it was insensitive of me to do that. So first, I want to apologize to Chris and Matt and their team. I think it is important to be open and transparent. It's well done. If you've ever watched the videos, which I have, they do a fabulous job with the camera angles and the sound and all of that. And I think I know members of the public do watch and enjoy these things. I've had a number of people, actually over the holidays, tell me that they watch and enjoy these meetings. And they're informed with what's going on with these high-quality productions that make it convenient for members of the public. So I do apologize for my comments. I'll try not to do that again. I didn't mean to be insensitive, but I was. And I want to thank the entire digital media team for what they do and for doing it so well. The other thing I want to say is I'd like to welcome Commissioner Tom Gordon to our Planning and Zoning Commission as our ex officio. It's really nice to have you here. And,
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Appreciate you being here. So with that, I will stop talking and I'll ask Commissioner if you'd like to make any comments.
None, just that I look forward to serving with everybody on the commission and listening to what comes before us.
Very good. Well, it's nice to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other members of the commission have anything they'd like to say?
Nope.
All right, hearing none. Madam Secretary, I'll move on to item 7, which is administrative report.
All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome Commissioner Gordon to your very first Planning Commission meeting. We typically are able to get together prior to the first Planning Commission to onboard him. We had a little kerfuffle last week on being able to schedule a meeting, but we're going to give him the total lowdown on what it means to be a Planning Commission member and all the wonderful things that you all do, how you look at projects in process, how you help transmit legislation to the Board of County Commissioners, and the role that you all play in decision-making and helping the county commissioners make their decisions as well. So thank you for being here with us today, and welcome back, Mr. Klosik, as well. Happy to have you here with us. The only other thing I have for you is that our office is back open. We are in the building. Today is our first day after an extensive hiatus. Had some work done in our HVAC system, so we're all happy to be here and up and running and being back to our old routine again. So we're happy for that as well. And with that, I'll ask Laura Mathias if she has any extensions. David is here in Laura's place. Thanks, David.
Good morning.
Morning.
David B. Kraft, Bureau of Development Review. I have 2 extensions. The first one is for Eldersburg Station, file number S-17-0042. This is the second extension of this site plan, and it is in Commissioner District 5. The second one I have is the Fields at Pheasant Run, file number P-13-008. This is the 5th extension. It is within Commissioner District 3, and this subdivision is for 7 lots. That's all I have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And actually, David, I could just put it in perspective.
I didn't use it.
Every 2 years, if you haven't done a pool permit, you have to get an extension. Is that correct?
So depending on what kind of process it goes through, so if it's a subdivision, there is a sunset provision of 2 years. So you would have to get an extension. For site plans, it is a provision of 18 months.
Okay. Yeah, so roughly even a year and a half for that as well. So when we're on our 5th extension, that's almost been 10 years since it's been approved and no action. So just for perspective reasons. And
Yeah, I often wonder about that and what it does. I mean, there's a cascading set of circumstances that are affected by these.
Right, there's a lot of variables involved, and to the point you're trying to make, another way of determining how long it's been is the file number itself. So the first letter outlines the process it goes through, and then the next 2 numbers is the year it started. So the second extension is P13, which means it started, at least the file number was created in 2013.
Is there a limit?
I think as long as you're filing extensions, you can continue indefinitely. One other question with that, David. When you do extensions, at some point, do they have to meet current standards for certain things if it's been such a long period of time, like stormwater management, for instance? Or?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the variables. So the director of development, or I'm sorry, the director of land and resource management is ultimately the decider as to if these extension requests get approved or not. And that is one of his criteria, is determining what's in effect, what's being proposed, and how does that impact any changes that have occurred between the original approval date and now. And one of those is being if there's been any code changes or updates and whatnot.
Okay, great. Thank you. I appreciate that. I didn't mean to put you on the spot
Nope.
there. Just thought
No problem
it
at
was
all.
kind of interesting to put it in a little bit of perspective, what we hear each meeting.
Very helpful.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. And then Abigail Rogers with BZA cases. She has a brief update for you as well.
Hi, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
So we've only had one case heard on January 3rd. That was for Metro Bobcat Inc. at 33 West Old Liberty Road, Sykesville, and that's in Commission District 4. It was for a vehicle sales use, and it was approved. And we do not have any other cases pending at the moment.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Abigail. And that is all for my administrative report this morning.
All right, thank you. And we'll move on to item 8, which is FY24 preliminary recommended CIP and bond authorization, which is Mr. Zaleski. I don't see Mr. Zaleski, but I see someone walking up.
Deb Effingham, who is the bureau chief, is here in his place this morning, and she'll be giving the presentation. Good morning.
Good morning,
Deb.
welcome.
Good morning. Okay, as she said, Ted is not able to be here today. I am the Bureau Chief of Budget. Every January, we come before the Planning Commission with the preliminary recommended CIP to give you an opportunity to review it for consistency with the master plan. You should have 2 books in front of you, a yellow book and a salmon-colored book. Do you have them?
We do. And by the way, CIP is Community Investment Plan, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So the salmon-colored book, this one right here, is all the requests that were submitted to the Department of Management and Budget for the FY24 through 29 budget cycle. And the yellow book is the preliminary recommended CIP that was presented to the Board of County Commissioners last Thursday that establishes our bond authorization that goes to the delegation to be submitted for our bond bill. If you could take your yellow book, I'd like to walk you through the contents of this book so you're familiar with it when you do review. The second page is the letter to the Planning Commission, and what this outlines is the budget schedule. And one of the things we'd like to talk about is what is the preliminary recommended CIP and what it is not. What it is a first look at the CIP. As I said last Thursday, we discussed it with the commissioners. It's just the very beginning of our discussions on the whole budget process with the commissioners. What we do is we take our existing 6-year plan and we start to build on it from there. We look to see if there's any adjustments that need to be made, and we also look at the requests that are being made. And it's, like I said, the starting point for us to have our discussions with the commissioners. What it is not is it's not the final CIP. It's just the very, preliminary look at what we believe is affordable. It's the budget office is still doing a lot of analysis. We're looking at revenues. We're looking at operating budgets. We're still have some questions that are outstanding on our CIP projects. And it's not a commitment to the timing, dollars, or funding mix of the projects, the dollars, and the funding mix of all these projects. The next page goes through the different categories in a higher level summary of the categories. The categories are public schools, conservation and open space, public works, which includes our roads and our bridges, recreation and culture, and general government. If you then turn to page 7, that is our quick guide. This is also a summary of the projects that are included in this preliminary recommended CIP. It's not as high level as the letter. This gives you a little bit more detail. And it's based on it goes through the categories. On page 11 and then starting on page 13 are comparison charts. This is also by category. It will list every single project that was requested. So what it will do is it will show you what was in the prior adopted, what was requested, and what the preliminary recommended CIP and any changes that were made. It's an easy way to see how it's changed over time. Starting on page 37 through 54 are all financial summary pages. And then thereafter, starting on page 57, is the public schools, and then it goes into the detail of the projects. So each category will follow after that with the details of the projects. Our preliminary recommended CIP is primarily focused on maintaining our existing infrastructure. There's a handful of projects that are notable that I'd like to point out to you. But other than these projects, almost everything is just maintaining our infrastructure, like overlaying our roads, and also maintaining our AgPres funding. On page 61 is the Career and Technology Center. This is a renovation of the existing space plus an addition to accommodate the growing population that has happened over decades for the amount of people that are going to the Career and Tech Center. On page 62, which is the next page, is the East Middle replacement, East Middle School replacement. That's on schedule to be complete this summer and will be opening up in the fall. And I forgot to mention the Career and Tech, they're looking for that to be completed in July of 2024. There are some road projects that might be of interest to you. There is Georgetown Boulevard Extension. That has funding in FY24 and FY25. That is where,
What page is that on?
oh, I'm sorry, page 92.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. Okay, page 92. That's where Georgetown and London Town meet. The plan is to put a roundabout in there and also open up the availability for it to be extended up to Progress Way. So that should alleviate some of the traffic issues down there and safety concerns. On page 95, we have Monroe Avenue Extension, another road connection in the Eldersburg area. There's two Monroes. There's a new development coming in. This would connect the two, so there's continuous flow of traffic. And then on page 159, this is our sheriff's headquarters. It'll be located in the government complex, which is across the street from the Board of Education facility. That is, preliminarily, we're looking for that to open by FY '26. There's still some land that needs to be purchased over there to make this happen, but we're moving along with it. So those are the most notable things. Everything else, like I said, is maintaining our infrastructure. So what we need from the Planning Commission is a letter, after you've had some time to review this, a letter to go to the Board of Commissioners prior to us entering into our proposed budget sessions, which begin at the very beginning of April. So I don't know how you want to handle that, if you want to schedule it for next month or the following month.
Sure,
to be
so
able to get that.
typically what we do is planning, along with other departments, look for items that are in the master plan, as well as other other functional plans within Carroll County, and we request those in the CIP request. So that's your salmon copy. So what I'll do is, I always do, is look and see what was requested and then what actually made it into the recommended. And typically, we will put down, if there's a particular road extension that we felt strongly about, we will say, may want to consider this in individual budget talks when we go before the Board of County Commissioners. Again, for that consistency. The land use article, which is the kind of book that we live by here for Planning Commission, requires this. So we'll be looking just to make sure that there's nothing that's out of the ordinary, which there shouldn't be within the CIP recommended budget. And this is a good way for us to check too if something is contradictory to the plan or may interrupt something that needs to be approved or adopted as part of the master plan, but we can't now because it was put into the CIP, which has happened before many jurisdictions, including ours, where we've had items that have come up before. So that's just another check and balance on our whole system of how the budget works, where the rubber meets the road for our planning process, essentially. So we'll be doing that. And typically we do, I think, at the February or March meeting, just depending on timing.
Okay. Are there any questions?
Anybody have any?
I would ask too, where is the Piney Run, we're going to improve the Piney Run Dam?
That is in this CIP.
I saw it noted in the summary. I apologize, I didn't go through all the pages on the email that you sent. But it's not a quiz. Could you send me an email and tell me where that is in the documentation?
155.
Yes, I can send you an
155?
email, but I can also tell you where it is.
Page 155?
Hold on one second. I think that's under general government.
There it is. Okay,
Page
good.
155.
Good. And then I guess the second thing I would ask is, where are we on the sheriff's annex? I don't know what else to call it, for the Freedom District. Does that begin construction this year?
No, actually, that was removed from the CIP. The commissioners chose to remove it from the CIP. It was in, I believe, maybe it was pulled 2 or 3 years ago. And they're doing the headquarters instead. They currently have that lease space down in Eldersburg, and I believe that will continue, that lease space, but the sheriff and the commissioners decided, to build the headquarters instead of
Good,
spending
okay.
the money on the
All right.
annex.
That's it.
Okay, any other questions?
I think, thank you for your overview. It's very helpful. It helps us to focus on certain areas. The other thing, in the past, what Linda was talking about, the review, is something I think we take pretty seriously. And if you look back at our letters, it's not just a rubber stamp.
Yes.
And it won't be this year either.
Yes.
So we'll look at it very carefully. But it is encouraging to see some of these extensions and so forth, which have been part of the master plan, working their way. I mean, a budget is nothing more than priorities, allocating scarce resources. And so what makes it in, what makes it doesn't, what doesn't make it in speaks volumes. So we'll take a close look at that.
I will say, we have made great headway in the county in general for these road connections and investing in our infrastructure. I'm very pleased about that progress that we have made over the last several years. And I think it's part and part because of what this planning commission has done in its planning process, and also bringing it forward in the CIP requests and continuing to advocate for those important projects.
Yeah, agreed, very much. And also, I think in the past, our ex officio commissioner having you at the table, I think helps, because you're hearing it in real time, just like we are. And I think that's a pipeline of information back. Not that you agree with everything we're doing, but at least you're here at the table and you're hearing it, and you're hearing the discussion and the debate and so forth. And I think that's healthy too.
Absolutely.
So, well, thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure talking with you.
Likewise. All right, that was item 8. So we'll move on to item 9, which is the 2023 Planning and Zoning Commission Work Plan.
Yes, so typically this time of year, I kind of bring to you what you'll see before you. Some items we don't know because they're development-based, and that is on a project-by-project basis. But I just wanted to give you an at-a-glance of some of the items you can be expected to be participating in and making decisions on and forwarding to the Board of County Commissioners through the calendar year 23. So I'm just going to pull up my quick presentation. Can't read this, I know you can't, and I have bulleted points, but typically what we do in our office is, we actually print this out old school, make a big poster, and that way too, you can see at a glance what is programmed throughout the year, and when there's opportunities, if you wanted to bring up a new item or to kind of help us plan so we don't have these crazy agendas. Sometimes we can't help it because there's just things that need to get done, but for the most part, I do try to plan a year in advance what we'll be bringing forward to you all. It's not perfect and things may change, but this is just an at a glance of what to expect as the commission to see this year. So obviously, the month of January, that's where we are today. We did not have a work session because it was right after the new year, and so this is our first meeting, which is our business meeting. As you know, we have typically 2 meetings, sometimes 3 a month, depending if it's a 5th Wednesday month or not, a 5 Wednesday month. So we actually just did the preliminary CIP and bond authorization. And we also have a rezoning case coming before you, which is going to be a staff report. Then in February, we're going to continue our work with the Transportation Master Plan, and that is, and actually I apologize, that was also on today's agenda, Chapter 6, but that is our Plan Major Streets. So that's something we just talked about in regards to the CIP and some of the connections that the county incorporates into its CIP plan, but also developer-driven connections as well. And then we're also going to bring to you traffic impact studies. So we're going to kind of try to do some little educational pieces about why we do certain things and how they're done and why they're done. And one of them is the traffic studies, the who, what, and why. I know we hear a lot about TISs when you have a site plan or a subdivision come before you, and what that recommendation is and what that means for the plan itself and what mitigation efforts may need to be done by the developer of that particular property. So Land and Resource Management's development review will be going through kind of in-depth that process. And then we'll be doing the CIP, which we just talked about, consistency with the master plan, and I will drop a certification letter for you all to review, and you'll have that prior to that meeting, so you can review it, and at that meeting discuss, and if you want to make any additional changes, we can do that at that time. In March, we will be talking again a little tutorial or work session on concurrency management. in the Freedom area. And what that means specifically is we have concurrency management. It's kind of like an adequate public facilities ordinance. Basically, if we don't have the county services to support the development in that community, that can stall development projects, residential or commercial, depending on what the standard is and what shortfall there is within that system. In the Freedom area specifically, it's the Freedom Elementary, and I think actually Carrollton may be approaching inadequate at this time. And what does that mean for development? What does that mean, and what bearing does that have on your decision-making process? How do plans move forward under that concurrency management realm? So we'll be talking to you about that as well, because we have a few projects that are coming up. We're kind of hitting the limit on some things, and so what does that mean moving forward? So we thought it would be good to introduce that to you and have a discussion so you have a full understanding of what that means in your decisions. And then, as you know, we had a soft launch, so to speak, of our Carroll County Master Plan. It's that time again. I believe Mr. Walters here, at least for the Freedom Plan. I can't remember if you were here for the Master Plan process or probably came in at the tail end.
No, I was here for it.
Yeah, the 2014 Master Plan.
You remember? My therapist and I talk about that frequently.
Yeah, sorry. Gosh, I know. Well, it's that time again, 10 years. So we're beginning to work on the next master plan. The reason I call it a soft launch is because we are looking at some background studies that will feed into the master plan. A really important study I think that we need to do and hasn't been done in decades is really an economic development study. The idea of this economic development study is to just get a base of where we are in Carroll County and what does that mean. So when we look forward to the master planning process, we can look at different scenarios for decision making depending on, you know, how does the county want to grow or not grow and move forward in the coming decades. So we'll be working with a consultant, which we already have, and we've done a lot of great work with that consultant. So they'll be coming before you too and giving you an update of where we are in that process. In April, there was, at the end of the last Board of County Commissioners, one of their last meetings, there was discussion, as you know, on planned commercial centers, which are part of our commercial districts, to look at the code in relation to those districts. As you recall, you disapproved a site plan for the Stavlis property, and that was appealed and went to the BZA as the appellate. They upheld that decision, and then there was
I thought they overturned it.
reversed
I mean, I'm sorry, they reversed, I'm sorry. And then it went to the circuit court as a,
It was an appeal
Okay.
of the BZA's decision
correct.
to the circuit court.
Who appealed that?
The community,
Yeah.
essentially,
Oh, I didn't know that.
appealed it to the circuit court, and that was eventually dismissed
Correct.
for failure to provide the full record and transcript to the courts under the Maryland rules. I'm sure, Mr. Wathers, you're familiar. You have 60 days to transfer the transcripts from the administrative hearing, which was the BZA, to the circuit court, and the appellant failed to do that. So it was ultimately dismissed by the circuit court.
Okay. So the project can go forward.
And it still could, there was no stay on the project, but the risk you run is if the circuit court had then changed the decision of the BZA, then that would be the issue.
It would have been a mess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, so because of that, the community came forward to the Board of County Commissioners and requested that the county code be reviewed in relation to how planned commercial centers are developed. So we'll be bringing that forward to you and what some of the concerns of the community were and and wanted to, you know, and we'll have that discussion of what should be forwarded to the board as any recommendations for any potential changes to the zoning code in relation to planned commercial centers specifically.
As part of that process, can it also include the idea, one of my frustrations has been that we vet things pretty carefully here. We certainly spent a lot of time on that plan, just as an example. ultimately, we didn't feel like it was compatible with the surrounding community, and a bunch of other things. And then it goes to the BZA, but it's heard de novo. So our reasoning, our questioning, our vetting, not part of the record, not taken into consideration, totally ignored, because that's the process. I don't like the process. I feel like that when we vet it here and we hear from the community and we hear from their council and we do all of these things, that ought to be part of what's considered on appeal. So it shouldn't be de novo, it should be appealed but on the record. Can that be part of the I mean, maybe nobody agrees with me and that's fine, but can that be part of the discussion? Because it need not be part of the discussion if there's no ability to change the process. So I guess the real question is there authority in this review to change the process where it could be heard?
I'm going to have to look in the land use article just to see what specific appeal rules they have from the Planning Commission up. Because, as Linda said, the land use article kind of controls everything we do here. So we might just have our hands sort of shackled by what's in the land use article and not have the ability to go from a de novo appeal hearing to just a sort of normal one.
Yeah, so if it's hardwired that way, certainly. I don't know the answer to that, but I, for one, would be interested in at least having that discussion if we're able to do that.
And part of what I've heard from the community as well, Linda, has been, maybe some architectural guidelines might be in order around that type of development, because we saw what was done, previously, and it really wasn't what the community anticipated in terms of quality and outcome. And so again, I don't know how to go about that, and I don't even know where one would start to have guidelines, architectural guidelines for mixed use. But what was anticipated and what we ended up with when we approved one that is now in existence there at 32 and 26, that wasn't at all what the community anticipated. Anyway.
So that could be part of our discussion.
That'll
right?
be part of our discussion
Yeah,
at
so
that
just make
time,
that
that
a
we can
priority.
talk
Yeah,
about the different
just a note.
variables
Just
that
a note.
can or cannot occur with regard to this. But expect that sometime in the spring and April.
Okay,
And again,
thank
the
you. continuation
continuation of our economic development, we'll be coming forward to you with additional findings and where we stand with that as well. Expect to see pretty much that most meetings until it's complete. Our contract goes through August, I believe. We were trying to get it done in this fiscal year, but we had a little bit of a later start, so it's going to kind of slid forward a little bit. So we will hopefully have that project complete sometime in the late summer. In May, we were directed to have a discussion with agricultural preservation efforts in designated growth areas. This is something that the board has talked about, past board and current board, about allowing agricultural preservation in designated growth areas. Typically, our policy is that we do not do that because that's the balance, right? Our designated growth area is for our development, and then our areas outside of that are for our agricultural preservation efforts that we target. If we typically do ag pres in a growth area, it's typically on the periphery, and most of the time there's an amendment that occurs prior to that when we work with the municipalities, especially when we do it in the county. We've done it post, and we would readjust the boundary so that way we're not preserving ag land in the areas that we have set aside for development. So we'll be talking more about that and where that started and any recommendations to move forward with that. As well as the Board of Education Facilities Master Plan. As you know, the Board of Education comes before this body annually, again, for consistency with the master plan. Our county master plan, our broader county master plan, is kind of like this guiding document for many things. And so part of that is the Board of Education's Facilities Master Plan, so all of their structures come before you for consistency with that plan. So again, to avoid a situation where a school is being recommended to be built in an area that may not have the need for a school or meet some of the criteria. So this, again, is one of those efforts to kind of have that check and balance to make sure that even school construction is consistent with the growth and development policies within the county. And then in June, we will present to you our annual planning report. That annual report is required by state law under the Maryland Land Use Article, and that is all of the development activities that have occurred over the last calendar year. So we'll be presenting to you the 2022 annual report of all development activities. So that's how many plans you've reviewed, how many use and occupancy permits have been pulled and approved, to any zoning changes, any code changes, any map changes, any annexations. It's pretty much soup to nuts, the whole gamut of what you would expect to see from the work that you all did. So it's actually really nice at a glance of what happened over your year. And then in July, we will continue our business meeting, with the Economic Development Land Use Study Workshop. And so that's it for the specific months. Really beyond July, we do have in November our annual administrative rules review, as well as elections of chair and vice chair. We will be doing that as well. And then as, maybe in 6 months, if I have additional things, I'll come before you in June just to update this list or if something comes up. But that's what we have so far. Other upcoming efforts is the completion of the Transportation Master Plan, which you all have been very much a part of over the last couple of years or so. So we'll continue to bring that to you and finish it up, hopefully, and Mary will give you an update on that sometime this summer, as well as the completion of the Economic Development Land Use Study. And then we're going to be starting a housing study. We have it in our budget to begin that. Housing's another critical component of a master plan. So we're going to be working on what Carroll County has and what it may or may not need for the future. So we'll be looking at that as well. And then more generally speaking, of a kickoff, not these soft little launches, but a true kickoff to the 2025 master plan, perhaps sometime at the end of this year, beginning of next year. Any questions?
That's a terrifying list.
Is it? I thought it seemed a little light.
No, it's a little bit like remediating world hunger and
Yeah.
world peace. I mean, they sound nice,
I
but
wish I was more ambitious. I just.
yeah. No, it's good. It's good.
Great.
These are all really important things to the community.
Yep. So not to be scared. And it'll be managed. But I just wanted to make sure that you all understood what was coming before you. Some really great things and some great movement ahead on stuff that you all are working on. So.
Very good. Any questions?
Is there anything else you'd like to see on that list?
Oh, man, my blood pressure's gone.
No, I think it's sufficient. Good. Well, thank you for that.
Of course, thank you.
All right. Well, then, I think then we're on to item 10 on our agenda, which is a special report. This is the Brillhart Terrace.
Yeah, just saw that.
Good morning. Good morning.
Morning. I'm Kirsten Agarl. I am with the Bureau of Development Review. You'll see on your pamphlets there that Laura Matthias is the person who set up this report. I am presenting it for her today for Brillhart Terrace. If I could, would you two introduce yourselves, please?
Thanks. Good morning. Clark Schaefer, 73 East Main Street, here on behalf of Scott Ford. Scott?
Scott Ford. I'm at 3404 Schaefer Drive in Hampstead, the property owner.
Very good. Good morning. Welcome.
Morning. Good morning.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to open up a presentation here. But in the meantime, again, I'm Kirsten. I'll be presenting this. This is Brillhart Terrace, Section 2, Plat A. This is a special report requested by the property owner, Mr. Scott Ford, for us to review with you and to make a determination on. There's currently no file open for this project yet, but depending on the decision made today, a file may be opened. So this property is located to the northeast area of the county. This is off of Schaefer Drive. You can see Route 30 right over here to the east. And our site is a little itty bitty right down here, highlighted in orange. You can see in the area surrounding the property, some of it's zoned conservation. This area here is agriculturally zoned, this tan brown, and this slightly yellower tan brown is residential 40,000. The property in question is also zoned residential 40,000. This property here, highlighted in orange, is the subject property of the site. This property to the east of that is Mr. Ford's house and his own property. In fact, he owns both of these properties. They are separate parcels. The parcel in question, the site, is a little bit less than half an acre in size. It's 0.438 acres in size. It was created as part of a subdivision plat back in 1976. You'll have a copy of that in your packet there too. The special report is before the Planning and Zoning Commission today for a determination about that plat regarding a request to remove a note that says reserved for future road regarding that parcel. And again, that's shown on that plat there. You can see it right over the parcel, and there's a note about it as well, which I will read to you as well, since I don't have it in the actual PowerPoint. So, yes, again, the property owner owns both properties here. So his dwelling is in this location. The subject property is essentially an open lawn. This is a photograph of it from very recently. You can see our sign here for posting for this meeting here. This is the neighbor property to the west. This is Mr. Ford's property here to the east. And this ridge back here is essentially the property line, the rear property line. So, and I'm not too sure how to go back. Oops, bear with me. Okay. All right, this parcel is shown on the plat from 1976. It says reserved for future road. That designation was intended to, at one point in time, potentially provide access to the parcel in the rear here. This parcel is about 41 acres in size. It's owned by a different property owner. The designation of reserve for future road was intended to potentially, in the future, if the property owner, which was a different property owner than the developer who owned this parcel we're talking about today, if that property owner of the property to the north decided to subdivide, this parcel A could provide access through a county road. The note specifies on the plat that this is what the intent was to be, and if and when that was processed, that plan was processed, and that road was designated for use for that subdivision, that potential future subdivision, that at that time, this parcel would be deeded over to the commissioners for that road. Well, that hasn't happened yet, and in fact, the property to the north has actually been put into an agricultural preservation easement. In 2011, that property owner went forward and put it into a permanent preservation easement. It's in perpetuity, and it's intended to conserve and preserve the land, which means we're not going to see a big subdivision back there. Now, it's important to note that even if this wasn't an agricultural preservation, this property has a significant amount of road frontage off of Broadbeck Road here that they could utilize for access for that subdivision. This parcel A, was never the only point of access for this subdivision. Okay, so, but that's almost beside the point now, since they are no longer able to process that kind of division. So the request again is that that note be removed. I am going to read some excerpts from that note. As I would like to have it on the presentation, but I just don't have that slide. So the note that we're referencing here that would be removed, and the designation and the annotation on the parcel, condensed, because it's very long, is essentially as follows. General Note 14 reads, the 50-foot wide reservation for future road, as shown hereon, is dedicated to the County Commissioners of Carroll County for public use. At such time that a public works agreement is accepted for the construction of a road to serve the property to the north of Schaefer Road. And at that time, a deed will be executed by the owners conveying that area to the county commissioners. So this parcel was never actually owned by the county commissioners. What that note reads is that if and when that property to the north goes through subdivision and that parcel is shown to be a road, then that will be deeded to the commissioners. So it was a private property sale. The property owner, Mr. Ford's, owned it for a number of years now. In fact, decades, I believe, now has been in ownership of that. Yeah. So It's not a commissioner parcel. We're not saying that we're changing the ownership to the commission, from the commissioners. It's a parcel that he already owns that was only set aside for potential dedication in the future if that division happens, which is not going to happen now, due to the fact that property is an agricultural preservation agreement. So the request before you today for this special report is that the determination was made by the Planning Commission regarding the removal of the annotation and that note on that plat, so the parcel can be unencumbered by that designation. Following this determination from the commission, the owner will submit an amended plat to be processed by the county review staff, and will remove that designation from that plat. So that is the request before you today, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. I'm sure Mr. Ford and Mr. Schaefer would be happy to answer any questions as well.
Thank you. Yeah, Mr. Schaefer?
Good morning again. Yes, we are here to answer any questions. We think this is a pretty easy one, but if anybody has any questions, we're willing to do it. I will add a couple, I think, salient points. One is that Mr. Ford has talked to several of his neighbors, and they're very in favor of this, especially the guy to the left, who is his neighbor, and who has always, just like Mr. Ford, thought this was part of his lot. Although he knew the note was on it, and by the way, he's paid taxes on it for all these years. And he's also talked to Royce Wagner, who is a son or grandson of Mrs. Wagner, the owner of the other property, early on when he came to me, and Royce said to him, "Hey, what's the big deal? It's in a conservation easement." We didn't know that at that point, so we quickly went to the land records and said, it's in a permanent conservation easement, meaning that it could never be used. These things, namely these reservations, are all over the place from the old days. They sometimes come up these days, and they're all different languages. This is the first time I've seen this language, but I've seen other language. I've seen just the note saying reserved. But anyway, that we don't need to get into that here. It was probably a good intention when it was put on, as staff pointed out. It was to provide a secondary access to that Wagner piece, which clearly is no longer needed. I'll just add one more thing, and some of you have been through this before. The other end of this is when you've got a situation where the parcel that benefits from it does develop, and then you come to this established neighborhood and say, by the way, we're just going to make a connection from what you think is a little private street there, which is public street, but which is your private little neighborhood, and we're going to add, I don't know, 34 lots to it. And they're going to just come through here. And then people come to you and say, no, don't let them do it. But that's not today. So we would appreciate your recommendation to remove this restriction or cloud on this title so that Mr. Ford can start comfortably using it as part of his yard.
So as Mr. Schaefer knows, my day job, I mean, I'm a lawyer, but it doesn't involve real estate, so I know just enough to be dangerous and get most stuff wrong when I ask what appear to be stupid questions. This makes perfect sense to me. How does this relate? It seems to me that we're taking a right away. There's a right that belongs to the property owner behind you. They have a right of access. It's been on these, this is how it's designated and conveyed to them.
So
we're taking this away, aren't we?
If I could speak to that, the note that I didn't read every single word, but I read most of that note 14. It states that it's dedicated to the county, and then it goes on to say that if and when that public works agreement for a public road is established on that parcel, then it's dedicated to the county. I don't think that, and maybe Clark, maybe you could give a little more info on that, but I don't think that this is necessarily the same thing as saying that there's a right of way for access, ingress and egress to the farm property. I think it says that this is reserved and set aside just in case that property develops. And if it does develop, then it gets a public road, and that public road goes to the county. I don't think it's the same as saying you can have a farmed road through here.
It's not an easement.
In legalese, yeah, to use the legal analysis, no, it's not a right. It would be a right if the county had forced, by the way, illegally, but if the county would have forced the owner of the property at that time to grant an easement to the adjoining property owner, and that had occurred, then that property owner would have an easement. Or if the property owner, him or herself at that time that did this subdivision would have done it, then that property owner would have a right. They don't have a right by virtue of a note on a plat that was required. And now you've forced me to go into the illegality. You can't, the government can't do this. You, back in 76 or whenever this was, you can't say to a property owner, oh, by the way, just take a piece of your property, and here it's 50 feet, okay, and a bunch of lots, but consider a master plan street, a bypass, and the farmer, you know, it goes across the farmland, and the farmer wants to do something out there, and the government says, I'll tell you what, we've drawn a line on a map, and therefore, why don't you just mark that area reserved for future road? What do you mean? How wide? Oh, make it 100 feet, because it's going to be a bypass. Put it across there, 100 feet. Well, why? Well, because we plan it. It might be a future bypass. Anyway, the case law is clear that the government has the ability to regulate that farmer's use of his land, but in the case of a reservation, that must be limited to like 2 or 3 years, something like that. In other words, if the government wants it for public benefit, they can reserve, but they got to put up or shut up within a certain amount of time, not 40 years. It's not, and when you think about it, it doesn't make sense, does it? I mean, why would you want to tie up somebody's land for 40 years, you know, in case you might need it? But anyway, I think it's these things are, I don't know, I'm not going to call them illegal because they're part of the subdivision process, and if the developer says, okay, if you approve my lots, I'll put these through. In any event, it clearly does not, it's not a situation that involves a legal right for the Wagners.
Okay. Well, I was having trouble getting my mind around exactly what this reservation is. So you've helped a little bit with that. We just certainly don't want to make it more complicated than it needs to be.
Well, and frankly, I mean, like I say, good intention, but when you start thinking about these things on the ground, I mean, I've been involved in 5 or 6 of them over the years. There's one off on Brem Road where they had a similar to this. It was one that said when the interior property wants to develop, they'll sign a PWA and then they'll build a road over this reserve strip. Well, the county commissioners got rid of that one because the neighbors didn't want Stacy Lee Drive. They didn't want people coming through there to get to the interior. The other thing, just if you want to get into the complications of this kind of stuff, is under modern construction, the topography looks pretty level there, but under modern road standards, I don't know if you could build a road in a 50-foot right-of-way. You know, you remember you need grading easements, slope easements on the adjoining lots. You need to do construction works. You need to move equipment around. Now, I noticed they've got an apron. Somebody was smart enough to put an apron, 100-foot wide apron at the front, because there's going to be curb cuts on these people's lines. But anyway, it's clear here that there will, I'll say never, because that easement's perpetual. There will never be a request from the interior property owner to try to execute that PWA and get a preliminary plan approved, because that's what the note says. When you get a preliminary plan approved, we'll then let you build a road over that area.
But that can never happen now because it's in.
It won't happen. No, it can't happen because it's
Agricultural
interior
preservation
property.
in perpetuity. I guess 2 other things. One is, so did you say that the owner of the property that's now in Ag Pres is aware of this and they have no problem with this, or where does that stand?
The grandson or the son?
The son, Royce, who is the son, and then the grandson who does the farming as well. I had spoken to him just because we had become friends. He's bringing eggs around, and I don't believe he was aware of any of this, because I had talked to him about it, and he just said, why would we do that? I'm the 8th generation farming this thing. We have no plans of getting rid of doing anything but farm that land.
So there's no indication right now anybody opposes this. And then the last thing is, it's not landlocked. If you take this away, there are other points of egress and ingress.
Correct. It's a little bit difficult to see with the scale of this map, but this property here, the mouse is centered on, is the property in question. Right over here on the western side, this full length here, that's a public road.
Lots of access.
Yeah, they have, I mean, it's gotta be hundreds of feet in length of access there. So even if, again, even if this was not under a preservation agreement, they would still have the ability and plenty of frontage to put any number of subdivision lots there if we put everything else aside.
Okay. All right. James, do you have any questions?
No, that's pretty clear cut, I think. And Broadbeck Road would serve the property if they decide to do anything, so.
Michael, do you have a question?
Yeah, I was just for some clarification, when I was reading through the notes here, the piece of property to the north, the 41 acres that's in Ag Pres,
Yes, this one right here.
in the deed of easement, it referenced 68 acres. So where, did that change to 41, or?
I believe a portion across the road is also under their ownership, and in fact, this whole strip here, this green area, this whole area here is also under conservation. There are actually multiple parcels in this area. There's quite a bit of agricultural preservation in this area, which is nice to see. Right, this area here where it's not colored in is town limits, so it's really nice to see that abutting. Linda was talking about that earlier with the agricultural preservation in and near growth areas. So, yes, there's quite a bit of that here in this area. This property is preserved, these are preserved, and I'm pretty sure this chunk right here is that 20 acres that's not included in this piece here.
So it's part of the deed.
That's part of the deed, and it is preservation.
It's part of the conservation easement. I don't know if they have it split up, like the property owner themselves could have two separate parcels that they put in together for this single conservation easement.
This conservation easement has 3 parcels.
Yes.
I'm just looking at the descriptions on the back of it here. It consists of 3 parcels, apparently.
So the portion that's not in preservation is that, whatever that road is that you were just talking about, Janice. To the east, right there, that's not in preservation.
Right where the tip of the pointer is, there are some lots here that already have houses. I believe some or all of those are excluded from preservation. However, this piece here,
Yeah.
the property in question, that 40-acre area, is in preservation, and so are these green portions here. So both sides of Broadbeck in this area are in preservation. Of course, all of the lots along Schaefer are also developed, and it looks like these already have houses here too. So everything basically to the north of this is either already developed or locked into a permanent preservation easement.
Okay, and there would be access if it's not from that road. Okay.
Correct. Broadbeck is a public road, so they'll be able to utilize that for access.
Okay.
I'm guessing that's how the farmer gets on the property now,
Yeah.
is Broadbeck.
Yeah, yep.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else, Mike? No. Luke, do you have any questions?
Will this lot be like still the same lot, or will it be absolved into your current property, or like what can be used for this lot like, in the future?
It'll be merged into his current lot effectively by an amended plat. So it'll all become, his lot will just become bigger by that.
Okay.
That'll be all paper, because on the ground, it's his lot now, but paper-wise, it'll be merged in.
Okay.
Tax-wise too.
Tax-wise too, yeah, tax-wise.
I've had several issues of mortgage companies not paying one because they didn't realize there was 2.
It's assessed at $4,300, so it's just interesting.
Paying taxes on it. Gentlemen, any? All right, so what you're looking for from us, I think, if I read the report correctly, is, let's see, a determination from the Planning and Zoning Commission regarding removal of the annotation, quote, reserved for future road, close quote, on the plat, and the related general note, so that the parcel may be unencumbered by the designation.
That's correct.
That's correct. Okay, so help us formulate what sort of a motion we need to accomplish what you need accomplished.
A motion to authorize the removal of the note and the designation on the plat. No, it's note 14, I think it is, isn't it?
Yeah, I specify note 14.
Okay, so does someone want to adopt that as their motion?
I'll give that a go.
You could just incorporate it by reference.
Absolutely. I move that we remove note 14 and the annotation reserved for future road on the plat so that it can be merged into one parcel.
Does that work?
Yeah, that does.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. I'm not going to re-articulate it because I just might get it wrong, but I think the record's pretty clear. Is there any further discussion? All right. Do we need a roll call or can we just do a voice vote? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Oh, yeah.
You gotta do public.
Yeah, I forgot to do the public comment. I'm going to hold that vote in abeyance. Does anyone in the public have any comments on this?
Oh, come on.
All right, then we'll proceed. So we have a
We
motion.
know all the people in the audience, and they're not neighbors.
Yeah, that is.
Right. I'd like to say I knew that, but I forgot to ask about public comment because I always do. Okay, so we'll proceed with the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Is there anyone opposed or abstaining? All right, then the motion carries. Notes removed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen. All right, the next item on our agenda is a recess, so we're going to take a 10-minute recess. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Good luck. All right.
We'll talk.
She took a 14-minute recess. How long does a 10-minute recess last?
14.
14 minutes. So, all right, we'll call the meeting back to order, and we are on item 12 of our agenda, which is rezoning case number 228, Eldersburg Investors 2 LLC. And I think Ms. Weber is going to give us an introduction.
Yes. Actually, this was first introduced to you guys at your December 13th meeting. So this is a discussion and a recommendation for the Board of County Commissioners. With us today, we have the property owner and then the representative. If Clark, you want to introduce everybody?
Yeah, good morning again. Clark Schaefer here on behalf of the property owner, Tom Pilon, who is a principal with the owner. And I have Matt Herf, who is a new partner in our firm, with us here to watch and learn. And we have Matt Taylor from St. John, we're Eldersburg Investors, and Andy Stein and Kelly Miller. But there's only Tom and I will be up here to take the brunt of the
interrogation.
Question. Interrogation, yeah.
Well, welcome, everybody. Glad to see you here.
Thank you.
Okay. With that, I'm going to go ahead and get started with my presentation. I'll give my presentation, and then you guys ask me questions, however you want to go about it. So with that, rezoning case number 228, Eldersburg Investors LLC. If you remember, this was first introduced on your January 13th meeting. We are in the Commissioner District 5 in the Freedom Designated Growth Area. The petitioned area is these 4 parcels, locating ourselves obviously south of Maryland 26, and then here we have the Liberty Exchange Shopping Center. The petitioned area totals approximately 12.47 acres. The applicant is arguing both a mistake in the current zoning and a substantial change in the character of the neighborhood has occurred. So the current zoning of these 4 parcels is C2 commercial medium. The request is to rezone all 4 parcels to C3. You can see we have a mix of zoning districts in the surrounding area of conservation, R20,000, R40,000, and I-1. Since the petitioners are arguing that there was a substantial change in the character of the neighborhood, we had to agree upon a neighborhood boundary that the change occurred in. Here we have the petition parcels. The neighborhood boundary extends north of Maryland 26 across accompanying Liberty Exchange and then down to the west to the Clees Mill intersection with 26th and then looping back around on the south side of 26. As always, we sent the petition out for agency comments, and these are the agencies we sent the transmittal to. We received 1 advisory comment from the health department. The proposed use may not be acceptable unless it is demonstrated that there is an adequate water supply, an adequate area for the installation of an initial and 2 replacement septic systems for the proposed use and any existing uses of this property. And this comment is only, is only regarding this parcel number 703, the second from the left. So getting into the arguments, as I said at the beginning, the petitioners are arguing a mistake in the current zoning. Obviously, this is a lot of verbiage. I'm just going to hit the highlights of their arguments as the petitioners will have their time to go into further detail. The petitioner alleges mistake in the current zoning of C2 commercial medium. The zoning authority did not and could not anticipate that these 4 contiguous parcels would come under the control and ownership of a single entity and thus would present commercial development opportunities that are more appropriate for a C3 zoning district. The property was mistakenly viewed as not eligible for immediate sewer service during the most recent comprehensive rezoning of the parcels. The individual rezonings show that more intense commercial uses, such as a business park, have been recognized as appropriate for the area. The individual rezonings within the neighborhood have allowed for an unanticipated commercial development along Liberty Road. The continuing development of the Liberty Exchange project, including potential development of the pad sites directly across Maryland 26 from the property, could and likely will entail a commercial development that would be compatible with C3 zoning. Unlike some of the other C2 zoning properties along Maryland 26, this property backs up to agricultural zone land, a lower density / mixed use type zone, which would be compatible with C3 uses such as a business park. Also, the I-1 zone property immediately to the east of the subject property suggests that a heavier zone than C2 would be appropriate. And then the property is appropriate for a C3 zoning designation, which is the only zoning district in the county allowing for a development of a business park. So those were the petitioner's arguments of mistake, and these are the staff conclusions. Staff believe there was no mistake in the last comprehensive rezoning in applying the C2 designation to the petitioned area. At the time of the last comprehensive rezoning, 3 of the 4 parcels in the petitioned area were requested by the then property owner to rezone from R20 to C2. This was a part of the by request phase of the comprehensive rezoning process in 2020 and 2021, and I'm sure some of you are familiar with this particular rezoning. Following an in-depth research of the rezoning request, a staff report was prepared by planning staff and presented to the County Planning Commission and the Board of County Commissioners. Staff and Planning Commission gave a favorable recommendation to rezone to C2, and the Board of County Commissioners ultimately approved and adopted the rezoning. The 4th parcel that was not a part of the 2020 by request phase was rezoned from R20,000 to Business General following the comprehensive rezoning process in the early 2000s. This process was similar to the 2020 and 2021 by request process when the then property owner applied for a rezoning, and a staff report was prepared by planning staff and presented to both Planning Commission and Board of County Commissioners. The zoning was ultimately changed from R20 to BG, and then with the elimination of the BG zoning districts, it was placed in the C2 district, which is what it is currently. The petitioned area was given a land use designation of commercial medium in the 2018 Freedom Community Comprehensive Plan, making its current C2 zoning consistent with this land use designation. So because of this, the designation of the petitioned area as C2 was deliberate, as each parcel was specifically looked at for its current zoning of C2. So that was the mistake argument, and now we're going to get into the substantial change argument. The petitioner says that there have been substantial changes in the character of the neighborhood related to road improvements, surrounding rezonings, changes to the water and sewer service areas, and development of the surrounding area. Changing the public sewer service status of a property is a substantial change in the character of the property, rendering it a different animal in the neighborhood with real potential to affect and influence the neighborhood in a fundamentally different way than a septic/well property. Zoning text amendments that have been adopted allowed for hybrid retail/industrial uses, thus changing the character of the neighborhood by creating a tenant mix virtually next door to the property that would be more compatible with a C3 zoning. Again, just going over the highlights as they will get more in detail with the petitioner. And then the staff conclusions of the change arguments. Staff believes there has been a change in the character of the neighborhood. The petitioned area applied for and is currently going through a water and sewer fall amendment. The property is currently in the existing and priority service category for water and long-range service category for sewer. The purpose of the amendment is to bring the entire petitioned area into the priority service categories for both water and sewer. Bringing the petitioned area into these service categories will increase the allowable water and sewer allocation for a possible development. The County Planning Commission reviewed this and gave this amendment a favorable recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners. This amendment is currently going through the public hearing process with the Board of County Commissioners, and it will be ultimately forwarded to Maryland Department of the Environment for their approval. As stated in the petitioner's argument of change, Maryland case law specifically notes that changes in public water and sewer infrastructure can constitute a substantial change. And lastly, at the time when the C2 zoning district was designated to the petitioned area in 2021, county staff were unaware the petitioned area would come under the control and ownership of a single entity, ultimately increasing the acreage of the parcels. Some of the major differentiating factors and uses allowed in the C2 and C3 district are intensity and necessary acreage. The C3 zoning district allows for more intense uses, but those uses also tend to require a larger acreage. Now that the petitioned area has increased in acres due to ownership, it may be more suitable for C3 uses. So staff recommends that the zoning for the petitioned area be rezoned to C3 or commercial high. Though the petitioner failed to prove a mistake in the zoning during the most current comprehensive rezoning, staff believes there is reasonable information constituting a substantial change in the character of the neighborhood. As I said at the beginning, we are here for a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners. We are also here to discuss the arguments with the applicant, and then we have time with the Board of County Commissioners on January 26th for an introduction and request to go to public hearing. We have a tentative public hearing schedule date set for February 16th, and then February 23rd if they are not able to come to a decision on the 16th. Realized that was a lot of information.
No, that was very helpful. It was really well done. Mr. Schaefer?
Thank you. This is an interesting one. I guess they're all interesting to me, or at least I wouldn't be doing this anymore. But, you know, this change mistake, as you've, I think, learned, they're both terms of art. They don't mean what normal people think they mean when you read them on a page. And I think the key that I want to get across in that regard here today is that while mistake, for instance, it can be what a layman thinks is a mistake. I can prove that this should have been yellow, but the guy colored it blue. You know, a Scrivener's error. You can also have certain other mistakes where the zoning authority, which you're part of, you know, when I say zoning authority, it's the commissioners ultimately, but you as a zoning, where I say the zoning authority made a mistake because they didn't know things and they acted with incomplete information. It does not mean they're stupid. It does not mean somebody blew it necessarily. Sometimes it can. It does not mean that the staff didn't present the right information. And this is a perfect a case for this. This is a case where the C2 zoning, it was good zoning when it was put on a couple years ago. And the reason it was good zoning then, I'll say that, nobody else has to agree or disagree with me, although I think Linda does, is that it was, when you look at those parcels 2-3 years ago, you saw the big parcel, if you looked at it, that's parcel 222. That's the parcel that had the BG on it at one time, okay? Then you see 3 smaller residential parcels, all in separate ownership. I think they were all, I know the parcel 222. And so you go, well, what do we zone this? Well, you got to assume that somebody that owns one or some of those parcels is going to come in for a C2 use at some point, or a C1 use. And you don't want them to have a C3 because it's, first of all, the C3, you don't need a big piece of ground to do the C2s, most of them. They're a little less intense. So it clearly makes some sense at that point in time. So what we have here, whether you call it change or mistake, are changed circumstances that were unknown or unknowable at that time. And that is specifically, these parcels are now been acquired by a single owner and in a position to be consolidated into one development of 12 acres. Well, the 12 acres is key here because under C3, you can do a business, the requested zoning, you can do a business park, but business parks have to be 10 acres minimum. So you couldn't have done a business park under the C2. And not only that, you couldn't have done a business park because the parcels were all under 10 acres. The water and sewer change is also a big, as planning, as staff, and by the way, this is a carefully written report. I think it's a little longer than some of them you get, but staff correctly points out that the change in the water and sewer master plan is a huge change in the character of the property and impacts directly the type zoning that the zoning authority would have put on this. If they'd have known it was going to become, and now it hadn't become yet, we've had a public hearing and the record's open for 10 days, but it's recommended, and this water and sewer map is going to change. And that works, either a change or a mistake. And I don't think you have to find judicially, because you're at this point, you're not operating, that either one or both. I think you need, this is unique to Maryland. The change mistake rule is unique to Maryland. You go to South Carolina, you want to change property from 1 unit to 400 units, you get 3 out of 5 votes on the local town council, it's rezoned. Maryland adopted the change mistake to try to create a gate through which the zoning authority has to go before they can rezone. Okay, we've seen that gate, studied it, your staff has seen that gate, and that gate is open. And if you look at this case, I would say this is the way the system is supposed to work. You've got a dynamic corridor that has a lot of stuff happening in it. You've got a master plan you do once every, was it 6 years now you're supposed to do?
10.
Every 10 years. So you might not look at this again for 10 years. And you need the ability to make amendments. You don't have to make the amendment, and keep in mind, all the gate does is open up, and now it allows the zoning authority to amend. Doesn't require them to amend, except in very limited circumstances. Doesn't require them, so it allows them to take a look at this. And we're asking you, and we have asked you, to take a look at this, see if you think the C3 zoning makes more sense for this. It's no secret that Eldersburg Investors is a offshoot of St. John Properties, and St. John developed the Liberty Exchange across the street, and has its eye on this as a similar, type development on Liberty Road. They're happy to be in Carroll County, and they'd like to be in Carroll County more. I think now's the time. I think we've shown that the gate's open, and I think we've shown that the C3 zoning makes sense. I think your staff agrees with us that the C3 zoning makes sense. This is an opportunity to amend, and we would appreciate your recommendation to the county commissioners so that we can proceed to a public hearing and put our case on before the commissioners. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you. Appreciate the presentations. For me, at least, they're very helpful. I'll start, and then, as usual, I'll turn it over with other questions. Did you have something?
I would.
Question?
Yeah, well, not a question.
Oh, that's right. You wanted to make an announcement.
I just wanted to disclose that I was involved with these properties, the 3 smaller ones from the beginning until the end when St. John or Eldersburg Investors bought the property, so.
Well, thank you for the disclosure. But that's all done, and that's in the past.
It
now.
is.
So, a couple questions, or comments, I guess, just to share for discussion purposes. My take on this, one, I agree very much. This is how it's supposed to work. And I think all the hard work we do on the master plan, we take a lot of data in, and we're supposed to, I think, have a 30-year time horizon when we do master plans. Of course, it's hard to look out into the future 30 years because it's hard to know what's going to happen tomorrow. But we try, and that's the purview of that. But in the meantime, life happens, and it's dynamic, and this is the process that, as Mr. Schaefer said, lets us take into account changes not in the defined term changes, just changes in life, and to be able to adapt and measure that against spot zoning, really, where I love West Virginia, but there are places in West Virginia where maybe they should have a process similar to this. So I hold that up just really as a contrast. I don't mean it as negative. So we want to make sure that we've got, we're looking at things more broadly. With that in mind, I was very much a part of the conversation way back when around these properties when they were residential and they wanted to make them something other than residential. And I remember struggling with that a little bit because, and I think the family, it might have been father, son, something like that, but they owned these properties and they were very much residential in character. And they were asking us to look out ahead 30 years, and at the property that's being used across Liberty Road, where St. John has that nice development, and saying, if you look out 30 years, it's not really crazy to think that there could be some similar uses here, and you ought to be forward-thinking. That's the whole part of planning. We're not the response commission. We're supposed to be the planning commission. So you look out 30 years, and they made the case for me, at least, and I was comfortable moving in, I think, to what at the time was BG. There were different owners, so they were smaller parcels. So where I come down, I'm not convinced on the mistake argument. I don't think there was a mistake. I was pretty deliberate in looking at the character of these things, and kind of had to push me up a little bit of a hill to go from residential, given that there's other residential and you got ag, into BG, which is now really the C2, but I got there. But it wasn't something that I feel like, and by the way, I appreciate, Mr. Schaefer, your sensitivities. I didn't take it that you were calling us stupid or that we made a mistake because we weren't paying attention, but it's nice of you to say
We
that.
never do that in public.
That's right. That's right. Well, I would say almost never. But anyway, but thanks for that. So anyway, from my perspective, having been here maybe longer than some of the others, I don't think you make the case, in my view, you don't make the case for mistake. Under the standards that we're talking about here. I do think it was very deliberate. But on the substantial change in the character of the neighborhood, I'm sold on that. I think that that the water and the sewer very much change what we can do. And I also think that the single ownership, which now makes it a 12-acre parcel, opens up things consistent with the use of a business park. And so I think, and I still keep my eye on your development across the street. I think these things can work hand in glove for the community. So anyway, long way of saying, I don't think you make the case, in my view, on mistake, but I do think you make it on the substantial change in the character of the neighborhood. And so I'm all in on making a positive recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners. Janice?
So having been involved from the very beginning on this, it was a hard sell originally because it was well and septic, and even though it was a commercial designation, they were limited in what they could do. I agree that the change of zoning is probably a little bit of a stretch, but the change in water and sewer, we have had water and sewer, the sellers would have probably been a lot happier with the outcome than what ultimately happened, although they were happy. So I would think that the change in that constitutes making a good case.
Michael, do you have any comments or questions?
I agree with what you guys are both saying. I think that the mistake argument is difficult. One thing, I'm sitting here and I'm listening, and the change in the character of the neighborhood doesn't a change to C3 also create a change in the character of the neighborhood? You can argue it both ways, but the water and sewer is the key here. So I'd agree. I think it makes sense.
Do you have any questions or comments? Mr. Lester?
I'm good.
Yeah, I agree with you guys.
Commissioner, any questions? All right. Well, then it sounds like it's sold, and your argument is yielding a recommendation, positive recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners. So we need to actually, I guess, have a motion that we make that positive recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners. Chair would be happy to entertain that motion.
Mr. Chair,
Sir.
you forgot to ask for public comment. I think I still know everybody out there.
On my sheet, Clark, it doesn't say I have to do that. I didn't actually forget.
Yeah, it does. Yep.
Oh, yeah, I guess it does. No, we're
It
here.
doesn't know.
It doesn't say public comment
That was
on
the
number
last one.
12.
Yeah, we
Well,
should
there's
have done
no-
that. That's my fault. I'm sorry.
you're
I
right.
apologize.
Not that I'm going to say the public can't comment, and so nothing wrong with inviting any public comment. Is there any member of the public that isn't already affiliated with us in some way that would like to comment? So, anyway,
I'm going to have to start helping Linda prepare those charts and sheets.
anyway, but I always appreciate the help. So
if I can just, before you make the motion, just so you know the weight of what you're doing when you forward, this is actually one of the 5 findings that the Boards of County Commissioners look at when they approve a piecemeal rezoning. And the Planning Commission recommendation is one of the items that they look at heavily in making their decision. So just, because we haven't done one of these in a while, and we just had one last month. So again, just to refresh your memories that, this is something that they look at when it goes to them.
So I appreciate that very much. It's a helpful reminder for us. And just because we're enjoying ourselves as we talk about the conversation doesn't mean that we're doing it casually. I think we understand the weight of what we're doing, and I think we're looking at this carefully and deliberatively. That's the way I believe our commission is dealing with this.
So are you ready for a motion?
I'm ready for a motion.
I would move that we rezone this property from C2, which is medium commercial, to C3, which is high commercial based on the change in the character of the neighborhood.
And forward it to the Board of County
And forward it
Commissioners
to
with
the
a
Board of
positive
County.
recommendation.
Yes, and forward it. Thank you.
Sure. So we have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, so we have a motion and a second. Does this need a roll call?
I think so, just in case someone has a different opinion. Yeah.
Okay, so we have a motion, we have a second. Is there any further discussion? Okay, then why don't we have a roll call?
Ms. Kirkner?
Yes.
Mr. Lester?
Yes.
Mr. Kane?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Klosik?
Yes.
Please let the record reflect that 5 are in favor and the motion carries.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your good work on this.
Just like to add that I also know that people watch these because I've been approached at the supermarket, both for my autograph and for people to throw some stuff at me.
You know you have a
The produce section.
In the soft produce section.
Hopefully not eggs, they're very expensive.
Good section.
Thank you all very much. All right, we'll move on to item 13, which is the Transportation Master Plan, and this is an introduction to Chapter 6.
Good morning.
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 I'm sorry, this mouse confounds me every time. Oops.
Is it the same testy mouse we have all
It
the
is
time?
the same testy mouse, but I seem to be worse than most people on it. This is the introduction of Chapter 6, the planned major roadways, or I'm sorry, planned roadway projects. You'll recall we've been to you, Claire and I, probably every meeting since October, going over what was, well, let me move along with the presentation. We've been here with Chapter 5, and this is the continuation of that. So we will not today be going through street by street at some point, and I'm not sure Linda included all of those on her work program, but we will be here going street by street, road by road. So this chapter includes all the planned major roadway projects in Carroll County. There's 3 different categories of them: the planned state highway projects, planned major streets, and planned neighborhood connections. All the listed projects have originated in a state or local planning document or are the result of a recognized capacity, connectivity, or safety improvement. And that's really important to remember. They're not all capacity problems. That issue has come up a few times. Some of them are safety and some of them are connectivity to the overall area. It's also important to remember the alignments are generally for planning purposes. The exact alignments are to be determined at the time of design. So basically, when you see these, the goal is to get from point A to point B, and oftentimes if they're part of a development, the development review staff works with the developer to accomplish that, but what you see on the map isn't necessarily where it will be. Projects such as resurfacing, minor intersection improvements, traffic signing, lighting and signalization, and bridge rehabilitation and enhancement projects are not included on this list. So the purpose of our review today is to give you a general overview of the chapter. I believe it was emailed to you. We will be sending out in the next few days for your future review of it. It looks like this. It's going to be much easier for you to read. It's it's 18 pages, 11 by 17, mostly tables and maps, and that's in line with what we discussed earlier about keeping this plan a little simpler and more user-friendly.
I have it on my iPad in front of me, and
Oh,
it
no.
is hard to.
No, you can't. Try your phone. That'd be really bad. And we are also posting it. We're making a few last-minute corrections to it, but we will be posting it on our department webpage. So again, Chapter 6 follows the corridor and sub-area analysis that was reviewed over the past several months. This sub-area analysis, Chapter 5, laid out the short-term and targeted solutions, as you'll recall, to the congestion issues in specific areas, many of which were breakout projects from what you'll be seeing today. As you'll recall, this was the result of our consultant study in 2020. However, this chapter, as we alluded to a number of times while we were discussing Chapter 5, presents the long-term or ultimate solutions to problems and challenges with the road network, and it includes all areas of the county. So the sub-area analysis, there were 6 areas chosen. This is for the entire county. And input for this chapter included over the last, we started this in 2020, staff of DPW, as well as Land and Resource Management's Bureau of Development Review, as well as we have met twice with all the municipality staffs to make sure they're on board and it's in line with their plans. So I'm going to do a quick page-by-page review of what we sent you. On page 1, you'll see it has the map on this side, and then a description of Maryland State Highway projects. These are from MDOT SHA. These are all reflecting the highway needs inventory. And just as a reminder, I know over the years we've talked about the different state and regional and local plans. So the highway needs inventory, it was last updated in 2020. It is done for every county in the state of Maryland. It's simply an acknowledgement of need, not a construction program, but a compilation of state highway deficiencies. So it's the first step, the very broad first step. Then we move on to the Plan Major Streets. Again, a lot of acronyms going to be happening here. The Plan Major Streets are necessary. These are county and municipal roads necessary to promote the efficient flow of traffic and overall connectivity in a specific area. These are county, municipal, and developer funded. And then we have the Plan Neighborhood Connections, very similar to the Plan Major Streets, however, they are for a slightly more targeted area. As I said, you have a countywide map, which again, this gets much easier to see when you get this 11 by 17 of all 3 types of roads. This is very general. We've had the comment that this is very hard to make sense of. It's not intended to be too specific. We can work possibly on making it easier to read. However, it's really just supposed to show you what's happening in each of the areas. And then also on this page 1, we talk about cost estimates. And the cost estimates from the state are those that are included in the HNI. These have not been updated in a number of years, and we are going to be talking to the state about seeing if we can get better estimates. They have actually done some better estimates for the ongoing regional plan, and what I've noticed for the 5 projects that are going to be in the regional plan is they're much higher. So what you're seeing for these state projects, it's low. They just haven't been updated. So as we move through this, we will try to get updated, at least for some of them. And then for the Plan Major Streets and Plan Neighborhood Connections, these costs were based on a formula given to us by DPW, our own DPW, based on current costs and the size of the road, so it was simply a formula. And we chose to present it with dollar signs because of the general way that we did it. We're not comfortable really presenting the actual number. This shows you, and it's laid out what the dollar signs mean. This gives you really a way to compare the different roads and to just see if they're a very high cost item. That's really the purpose of even including that in there. So again, that's page 1. You can't read it there, but it is quite legible when you get it in printed copy. So on page 2 is all of the state highway projects from the HNI, as I said. What you have is the estimated cost provided by SHA, the plan source. All of the plan source is the HNI. Any other studies or plans that might be relevant, we've included in there whether or not they're in the county's priority letter, whether or not there was, for instance, for Maryland 32, a planning and environmental linkages study. So that's just additional information for you. If it's currently in the CTP priority letter, it's important to know. Any changes in the status since the last plan, which would mean the master plan, as well as any other notes regarding feasibility or any other ongoing things happening with it. So page 3 has 2 Maryland State Highway projects that are being removed from the plan, and including the reasons for their removal. And then it also has the 15 planned major streets that are being recommended in this plan, including, as I said, the general cost estimate represented by dollar signs. The plan source, in a lot of cases, it is a municipal plan. And again, we met with the municipalities to make sure we're still on board with what they're doing and planning. The length of the road in linear feet and the status since the last plan amendment. Again, the status and the feasibility are just, that's informational. We will be adding to those as we move through this in the next several months if there's any changes to that. And then there are 3 planned major streets that were removed from the plan, including the reason. Pages 3 and 4 are the 28 planned major, or I'm sorry. Yes, sorry. Pages 3 and 4 are the 28 planned neighborhood connections included in this plan. Again, that's slightly smaller for a more targeted area than the planned major streets. And that is the same information. We tried to make the tables as consistent as possible for comparison purposes. Again, the cost, the plan source, the feet, the status, and other feasibility issues. So there are 28 remaining in the plan from our other land use plans. And then what you see on page 4 are 27 planned neighborhood connections that were removed from the plan, including the reasons for their removal. And the reasons for removal were varied. They came from our discussions with other county staff, DPW and Development Review, as well as the town staff, and most were feasibility issues. Some of them had been on for years and years, and as we went over them, we were told, especially by DPW, that it just wasn't feasible anymore. In some cases, things had been built right over them, and based on that, there just wasn't enough of a need to counter that. So, and in some cases, they were completed. That was the good news. And in some cases, they were removed from municipal plans. So we respected that and took them off of our plan. So pages 5 through 18, you will see individual maps and descriptions of all remaining planned major streets and planned neighborhood connections. They're by category in alphabetical order, 3 per page, except for the one last page has to have 4 on it. What you'll see is a detailed map, the functional classification of the roadway, the length of the road, the right-of-way status. We had Abigail Rogers on our staff do extensive deed research. Really appreciate that. It was a lot of work to find out what right-of-way had been noted on deeds, what's been secured, which really hadn't, Linda, correct me if I'm wrong, that hadn't been done for the master plan. It just was a huge job to do. So she spent a lot of time doing that, and we're comfortable now that we have a status of the right-of-way.
As well as our intern, too, spent a ton of time on that as well, scanning in and getting and pulling
yes.
from the Laserfiche.
That's great. And then a short description on the purpose of and the need for the road. So this is just an example of Bennett Surf Drive Extended and what you'll see for all of them. And then I also included in this present, oh, something happened. This is how each, this is for people that are watching since they don't have it in front of them yet. It's about to be posted on the website. Again, alphabetical, it's not by area, so if you're interested in a certain geographic area, you'd have to go looking for the actual road, but that's how we arrange these. And again, All that information is provided there. They're numbered. The numbers coincide with the numbers in the charts, so it is easier to find those. And again, this is just another example of a page. So what we haven't done yet, and what we'll be working with you regarding after we go over all these, are the prioritization of projects. We haven't worked this completely out. It's something we'd want to have a discussion with you all about. We would want to use these. This is what we've come up with so far as 10 important items for consideration. I'll just briefly list them. Inclusion in a designated growth area or priority funding area. As planners, that's always one of our most important things to consider. Safety, oftentimes a huge factor. Functional classification, priority should be given to collectors over local roads, et cetera. The higher the functional classification, probably the more important the road. Existing financial support and right-of-way. This one, we haven't even really discussed. We may weigh this higher as far as if it's already in the county's CIP, which you discussed several hours ago, it may need a higher weight. That might be a more important factor than some of all these others. Cost benefit, if it's a very low cost, or sometimes there's just that little bit of a final connection, and you've seen that when you've looked at development review projects, that would provide a benefit for the larger area. That could be important. Connectivity, again, that was discussed earlier today, how important some of these connections are to the overall functioning of an area, particularly the Freedom area. Improving the operation of existing infrastructure, that means providing the alternative. Dickinson and Ridenour being examples of that, taking it off a major road and providing an alternative. Anything that is supportive of economic prosperity in the county is very important. The immediacy of the need, recent developments in that area necessitating it, and then environmental considerations, that it has minimal effects on environmental and cultural resources. So this part of it is still a work in progress that we hope to discuss with you more. But one of the reasons we wanted to do this plan was to provide a prioritization of projects rather than just this list that's always existed. So we see this as an important part of this. Okay, that was a quick overview of what we'll be doing over the next several months with this chapter. Do you have any questions about it today?
So this is important for a lot of reasons. I know when we did the last master plan, we had some folks coming forward criticizing, saying we hadn't spent enough time looking at traffic issues as we went through that master plan. So it seems to me that by having this process being done now in front of the next master plan, this is good data that, I mean, there's a little bit of a chicken egg thing, because we want to make sure this is consistent with the master plan. At the same time, it's data that's going to be considered as we develop the next master plan. But nevertheless, the data is really important and it's timely. So it just seems, and it's nice to have this discussion outside of having all the weight of the master plan hanging over us.
Correct, yep.
So I just think this is really important for all the obvious reasons, but also plugging it into this larger process and what it can mean and how it can help inform that. And I think that'll improve the data we have to make decisions around developing the next, or updating the master plan, however you phrase it. So any questions or comments?
I would say that, again, the prioritization and how we prioritize these projects, there's going to be a subjective component to that, but insofar as you could help us understand which of those components is how we should weight those, I would find that helpful. You know, cost, benefit, traffic alleviation, safety, all those things are important. Right. So how do we weight that? Or how do you weight it, better yet, right? I don't know. But I'd love to see or understand what your thoughts are around that too.
And we've been talking about it. The one thing we do think, as I said, that should be more heavily weighted is if it's currently in the CIP, it's the commissioners, the Board of County Commissioners has already prioritized it.
It's done, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's at least prioritized. So that is important. Yeah, that is something that we'll have to work through. We may not be prioritizing them numerically, like this is the most important road and this is the least important road. We'd probably be going for a high, medium, and low
Okay.
kind of categorization.
Yeah, because sometimes too, things come up. A development may come up that we were unaware of, and it might be a priority, may not be our number one. So we don't want to get stuck, well, that's not our number one priority, so we shouldn't be moving forward with that. But every road we have is listed for a reason because they're important connections. So we don't want to try to rank one over another, but just say, in priority scale, why is this important? Because of these reasons, type of thing. And that's the same thing we do with the funding too as well. It's so hard to put a dollar amount on anything these days. Prices are rapidly escalating, so that's why we just did the dollar sign symbol to show that this is way more expensive than some of the other ones and not put dollar amounts to things.
I think having some flexibility around it too, because you can be overtaken by events. You can think this one is going to be very important, and all of a sudden, like you said, one of these projects that's been, is 10 years old, all of a sudden jumps out and starts taking off. That might affect how we want to prioritize as well. So,
correct.
It's just, it's part of living life, I guess. Well, good. Well, we appreciate, this is a lot of work, and we know it's a lot of work, and you're doing a great job. So we appreciate the overview, and we appreciate how you sort of give it to us in bite-sized pieces too. That's really, really helpful.
You'll be getting it for the next several months.
A lot of bite-sized
A
pieces.
lot of bite-sized pieces.
Good. Anything else on this topic? Or do
Nope, that is it for today.
Planning tapas.
Exactly. Good. All right, well then I think that concludes item 13, which leads us to item 14. I'd like the record to reflect I didn't need any prodding to ask for general public comment on this, but there's no members of the public present, so anyway, we'll skip that, and then with that, I would be happy to entertain a motion for adjournment.
Mr. Chair, just real quick, I wanted to follow up with your question about the de novo review.
Yeah.
So I've examined the case law, and unfortunately, the Court of Appeals, or I guess the Supreme Court now, has said that in a proceeding before the Board of Appeals, an entirely new hearing in which all specified issues on appeal should be heard anew as if no decision had been previously rendered, the burden still remains with the applicant to establish the facts necessary. So while it's a whole new record, so they don't get the transcript or anything officially from you guys, there's nothing that prevents you technically from, providing testimony if you feel fit. It's just that just creates some more wrinkles in the process. So I just wanted to follow up with that.
Interesting. Okay. Well, thank you for that. Appreciate it. Anything else needs to be before us before we adjourn? All right. So I'd be happy to entertain a motion for adjournment.
I move we adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
That's unanimous. Thank you. We're adjourned. Thank you all very much.